You already know more than you think about why people ignore you. But here's what no one tells you. The moment someone ignores you, they're actually revealing everything about themselves, not you. This is the skill no one teaches you. Yet it's the most powerful tool for unshakable confidence. Most people spend their entire lives taking ignoring personally. They spiral into self-doubt. They question their worth. They create elaborate stories about what they did wrong. But what if I told you that being ignored has almost nothing to do with you? What if I told you that the person ignoring you is actually trapped in their own psychological prison, and their behavior is a desperate attempt to manage their inner world? By the end, you won't just understand how to handle being ignored. You'll understand the hidden psychology of human behavior, and most importantly, you'll understand yourself. Most people are trained to believe that ignoring someone is about power, superiority, or simply not caring. That's surface-level thinking. The truth runs much deeper. Every person you meet is wearing a mask, not because they're trying to deceive you, but because they're trying to survive. The mask is their protection against a world that feels threatening, unpredictable, or judgmental. When someone ignores you, they're not operating from a place of strength. They're operating from their mask. And here's what's fascinating. The mask always reveals what's underneath. Think about the last time someone ignored you. Maybe it was a text message left to read. Maybe it was being excluded from a conversation. Maybe it was someone walking past you without acknowledgement. Your first instinct was probably to take it personally. What did I do wrong? Do they not like me? Am I not important enough? But here's the shift that changes everything. When someone ignores you, they're not making a statement about you. They're making a statement about their internal world. Here's what's actually happening. In their mind, they're overwhelmed by their own thoughts and emotions. They're managing their own fears and insecurities. They're trying to maintain control over their environment. They're protecting themselves from something that feels threatening. The person who leaves you on red might be paralyzed by anxiety about saying the wrong thing. The person who excludes you from conversation might be intimidated by your presence. The person who walks past you might be so consumed by their own problems that they're literally not seeing you. Here's something most people never consider. Every human interaction requires energy, and most people are operating from a place of energy scarcity. When someone ignores you, they might be conserving their emotional energy for what they perceive as more important battles. This isn't about your worth. It's about their capacity. Think about it. When you're exhausted, overwhelmed, or stressed, how much energy do you have for social niceties? How much bandwidth do you have for complex interactions? The person ignoring you might be in emotional survival mode. They're not choosing to hurt you. They're choosing to protect their limited resources. Watch how people ignore others, and you'll see patterns emerge. The person who ignores you in front of others but texts you privately, they're managing their social image. The person who ignores you after a disagreement, they're avoiding confrontation because it threatens their sense of control. The colleague who ignores your ideas in meetings but steals them later, they're operating from a scarcity mindset, believing there's not enough recognition to go around. Each type of ignoring behavior is a window into that person's fears, insecurities, and coping mechanisms.
If our content resonates with your style, don't forget to subscribe and support us. Thank you.
Now we go deeper. This changes everything about how you see human behavior. Every person is operating from a set of unconscious programs installed in childhood. These programs run automatically, especially under stress. When someone ignores you, you're witnessing these programs in action. Most human actions are driven by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough, fear of losing control, fear of being exposed. When someone ignores you, they're usually trying to manage one of these fears. The fear of intimacy. If I respond, they might want more from me than I can give. The fear of conflict. If I engage, this might turn into a confrontation. The fear of inadequacy. If I respond, they might realize I don't have anything valuable to say. The fear of being seen. If I engage authentically, they might see my flaws. But here's the deeper layer. These fears are rarely about the present moment. They're about past wounds that never healed. The person who fears intimacy probably had their trust broken early in life. The person who fears conflict probably grew up in a chaotic environment where confrontation meant danger. The person who fears inadequacy probably received the message that their worth was conditional on performance. Here's what no one talks about: most people who ignore others are actually drowning in shame. They're so convinced of their own inadequacy that they can't bear the thought of being seen clearly. Shame is different from guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. When someone is operating from shame, they believe that if you really knew them, you would reject them. So they reject you first. They ignore you to avoid the pain of potential rejection. This is why some people ignore you after moments of vulnerability. They shared something real with you, and now they're terrified that you'll use it against them or judge them for it. Here's something most people never realize: when someone ignores you, they're often projecting their own insecurities onto you. The person who ignores you because they think you're too successful is really afraid of their own mediocrity. The person who ignores you because they think you're too confident is really struggling with their own self-doubt. This is pure psychological projection. They're not seeing you clearly, they're seeing their own fears reflected back at them. Watch for this pattern: people who ignore you publicly but seek your validation privately. This is overcompensation in action. They ignore you in front of others to maintain their social positioning, but they need your approval to feel good about themselves. It's a contradiction that reveals their internal split. Some people ignore you because it gives them a sense of control. In a world where they feel powerless, ignoring becomes their way of exercising influence. But here's the irony: the need to control others through ignoring actually reveals how out of control they feel internally. Here's what changes everything. All adult behavior stems from childhood wounds, not adult logic. Every person who ignores you is operating from a wound they received before they could even understand what was happening to them. They're not making a rational choice. They're following a pattern that was burned into their nervous system decades ago. Most ignoring behavior traces back to one of these childhood experiences: being ignored by a parent who was too busy, too stressed, or too absent, being punished for expressing needs or emotions, being made to feel invisible or unimportant, being taught that love is conditional on performance, being overwhelmed by a caregiver's emotional needs and learning to disappear. The child who was ignored learns to ignore others as a form of self-protection. I'll ignore you before you can ignore me. The child who was punished for having needs learns to ignore others' needs. If my needs didn't matter, why should yours? The child who felt invisible learns to make others feel invisible. Now you know how it feels. Often when someone ignores you, there's envy underneath. They see something in you that they wish they had: confidence, success, authenticity, peace. But instead of using you as inspiration, they ignore you to diminish the pain of comparison. It's not about you. It's about what you represent to their wounded inner child. Some people ignore you because they're operating from a scarcity mindset around attention. They believe that if they give you attention, there will be less for them. This stems from childhoods where attention was scarce, where they had to compete for love, where being seen felt like survival. Here's the key: insight. All behavioral patterns are confessions of inner pain. The person who constantly ignores you is confessing their fear of connection. The person who ignores you after vulnerability is confessing their fear of intimacy. The person who ignores you when you're successful is confessing their fear of inadequacy. The Stoics understood Something profound: you cannot control other people's actions, but you can control your response to them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. When you're ignored, you have a choice. You can react from your ego, or you can respond from your understanding. The ego says, 'This is about me. I need to fix this. I need to prove my worth.' The understanding says, 'This is about them. I can observe this. I can learn from this.' Here's your first revelation. Being ignored is information, not rejection. It's data about another person's internal state, not a judgment about your worth. Once you see this psychological machinery at work, you can't unsee it. You start to feel compassion instead of hurt. You start to see the frightened child operating the adult mask. The Stoics called this the view from above, the ability to see human behavior from a higher perspective, understanding the forces that drive it. Epictetus taught, when someone is properly grounded in life, they shouldn't have to look outside themselves for approval. This is the essence of Stoic wisdom. Your peace cannot depend on how others respond to you. Your worth cannot be determined by whether someone acknowledges you. But here's what makes this practical. When you understand the psychology behind ignoring, you stop making it about you. You see it as information about their inner world, not a judgment about your value. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much trouble he avoids, who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." Here's something that will blow your mind. The people who ignore you are often reflecting back your own unhealed wounds. If being ignored triggers intense anger, you might have your own wounds around being unseen. If being ignored triggers desperation, you might have your own wounds around abandonment. If being ignored triggers shame, you might have your own wounds around worthiness. The people who ignore you are not your enemies, they're your teachers. They're showing you where you still need to heal. This is why some people's ignoring bothers you more than others. It's not about the severity of the ignoring, it's about how it resonates with your own unhealed parts. This isn't just a skill, it's a responsibility. When you understand the psychological machinery behind ignoring, you become responsible for responding with wisdom instead of reacting with emotion. You can choose to feed the cycle of hurt and reaction, or you can choose to break it with understanding and non-attachment. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Whenever you want to cheer yourself, consider the good qualities of your companions. When you understand that ignoring comes from wounds, you can see the wounded person behind the behavior. This doesn't excuse their actions, but it frees you from taking them personally. You're not being ignored because you're not worthy of attention. You're being ignored because the other person doesn't know how to handle what you represent to their wounded inner child." This is the ultimate freedom, understanding that other people's behavior is about their inner world, not your worth. When someone ignores you now, instead of spiraling into self-doubt, you can ask, what wound might this be coming from? What am I representing to them that feels threatening? How can I respond with compassion instead of reaction? This doesn't mean you accept poor treatment. It means you see clearly what's happening and choose your response from wisdom instead of reactivity. Here's a practical exercise. Next time someone ignores you, pause before reacting. Take a breath. Ask yourself, what might they be going through that has nothing to do with me? Maybe they're dealing with family problems. Maybe they're overwhelmed at work. Maybe they're struggling with depression. Maybe they're in physical pain. Maybe they're processing trauma. When you shift from "why are they ignoring me" to "what might they be going through," everything changes. The Stoics understood that attachment is the root of suffering. When you're attached to someone's response, you give them power over your emotional state. But non-attachment doesn't mean not caring. It means caring without needing to control the outcome. You can care about someone and still be okay if they ignore you. You can value a relationship and still maintain your peace if they don't respond. You can love someone and still respect their need for space. This is the ultimate freedom, being unshakable regardless of how others respond to you. Here's the paradox: the less you need attention, the more magnetic you become. The less you chase validation, the more people are drawn to you. When you're no longer desperate for responses, you become someone worth responding to. When you're no longer needy for acknowledgement, you become someone worth acknowledging. This isn't a strategy, it's a natural result of inner strength. People are attracted to those who are complete within themselves. True confidence comes from understanding. When you understand why people ignore you, you stop needing their validation to feel good about yourself. You realize that their ignoring says nothing about you, and everything about their capacity for connection in that moment. The Stoics believed that obstacles become the path. Every time someone ignores you, you now have an opportunity to practice non-attachment, compassion, and inner strength. You're not just learning to handle being ignored, you're learning to see human behavior with clarity and respond with wisdom. This makes you magnetic, not because you're trying to get attention, but because you're not desperately seeking it. Being ignored is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of another person's capacity for connection, filtered through their wounds, fears, and unconscious patterns. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. You become unshakable because your sense of self is no longer dependent on how others respond to you. You've learned to see the frightened child behind the adult mask. You've learned to respond with wisdom instead of reacting with hurt. This is the Stoic way, not because you don't care, but because you understand so deeply that you're free. Comment below and tell me about a time when someone ignored you. What do you think was really happening beneath the surface for them? Now that you understand this psychology, how would you respond differently? Speaking of understanding human behavior, you might have an extremely rare personality type that most people don't recognize. If you found this breakdown fascinating, you're probably someone who sees patterns others miss and thinks deeper than most. Click on my next video to discover the 8 signs you have an extremely rare personality. The insights will shock you about who you really are.